And once they've had a chance to leave the table, I'd like to welcome our second panel, Representative Jeff Duncan and Ranking Member Frank Pallone from the Committee on Energy and Commerce.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
while we're waiting for them to take their seats, you were not present when I was able to at least regale our fellow committee folks about the University of Texas making it to the Super Regionals in baseball in light of your announcement about the University of Oklahoma. I won't bring up Clemson out of respect for my friend who's now taking the mic.
Well, they play pretty good baseball in Texas, so it's no big surprise to me. Anyway, well, again, I want to welcome our two witnesses in the second panel. And Mr. Duncan, we welcome you to the Rules Committee, and I welcome your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McGovern for recognizing me to speak in support of H.R. 1640, the Save Our Gas Stoves Act, and H.R. 1615, the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act. It's really hard to believe that we're here talking about the federal government banning an appliance such as a gas stove. H.R. 1640, the Save Our Gas Stoves Act, is a bipartisan bill that was introduced by Energy and Commerce member Debbie Lesko to stop the Department of Energy from finalizing its proposed regulations to ban the majority of natural gas-fueled cooking stoves on the market today. H.R. 1615, the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act, is a bipartisan bill introduced by Energy and Commerce member Kelly Armstrong to prevent the Consumer Product Safety Commission from undertaking work that could result in an outright ban or a substantial price increase in the cost of a new gas stove for Americans, while allowing the CPSC to continue the important safety work of the Commission. These bills are necessary because of the Democrats' coordinated all-out war on oil and gas and our government getting into our household kitchens. In January, Consumer Product Safety Commissioner Trumpka suggested that CPSC should consider a ban on gas stoves. Commissioner Trumpka's threat to ban gas stoves received a lot of attention, and while the chair of the CPSC and the White House tried to walk it back, the real agenda of the extremists embedded in the administration was on full display. Furthermore, neither the president nor the chair of CPSC have rebuked advocacy groups like the Rocky Mountain Institute, which I'll note has a questionable tie to China, and that alone should raise concerns on both sides of the aisle. I'll start with H.R. 1640. In February, the Department of Energy proposed new regulations that would effectively ban more than half of the gas cooking stoves on the market today. Americans do not want the federal government to tell them how to live their lives, whether it's the kind of car they drive or how they cook their food. Regrettably, the Department of Energy plans to do just that. DOE is caving to radical environmental activists agreeing to a backroom sue and settle deals to regulate thousands of consumer products and appliances over the next 2 years. DOE's proposal to ban gas stoves is just the tip of the iceberg. Members should also be aware that DOE has plans to regulate virtually every appliance in our homes, including air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines, hot water heaters, dryers, and even microwave ovens. The Department of Energy's proposal to ban gas stoves is deeply unpopular, and I believe it also violates the statutory requirements of the Energy Policy and Conservation Act. The law requires the DOE to prove that proposed efficiency standards are cost-effective and save a significant amount of energy. The law also prohibits DOE from using efficiency standards as a backdoor ban on natural gas. How do we know this new rule is politically motivated? Well, that's because DOE evaluated the existing efficiency standards for stoves and ovens in 2020 and declined to proceed with new regulations, explaining that any new standards would not be economically justified and would not result in a significant amount of energy savings. It's clear that DOE's most recent proposal fails the statutory test to issue new regulations. When DOE evaluated the proposed standards, it found that 96% of the gas stove models it tested would not comply. DOE also found that average annual consumer savings under the proposed rule would only be $1.08 over the average lifetime of the product. Let me repeat that. DOE found that the average annual consumer savings under the proposed rule would only be $1.08 over the average lifetime of the product. The Energy and Commerce Committee has examined DOE's efficiency standards setting process through roundtables and background hearings. H.R. 1640 has been through regular order in the committee where DOE Secretary Granholm testified on the legislation and committee members marked up the bill and favorably reported it with a strong bipartisan vote. Next, I want to turn to H.R. 1615. which addresses the CPSC regulations for gas stoves. The minority, during the markup and in their minority views, have attempted to mislead the American people about what this bill actually does. Committee Democrats have falsely claimed that H.R. 1615 would stop the CPSC from using federal funds to issue and enforce safety standards for gas stoves. This is simply not true. H.R. 1615 would not prohibit the CPSC from acting under its statute to address true safety hazards associated with faulty gas stoves. Nothing in H.R. 16 would prevent the CPSC from conducting product recall, putting out a safety notice, participating in voluntary standards development related to gas stoves, or conduct rulemaking, so long as the result is not a broad ban, prohibition on sale, or a substantial price increase to the average price of a gas stove in the United States. H.R. 1640 and H.R. 1615 are both important bipartisan bills, and I strongly encourage my colleagues to join me in the support. And with that, I'd like to thank the Rules Committee for meeting on this legislation today, and I look forward to sending it over to the Senate and ultimately to the President's desk. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Pallone, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cole and members of the committee. I'm here today to voice my strong opposition to these two bills that are based on what I consider the false notion that the Biden administration is planning on banning gas stoves. And let me be emphatically clear. The Biden administration is not planning to ban gas stoves, but that has not stopped Republicans from saying so. Now, the first bill is H.R. 1615, the Gas Stoves Protection and Freedom Act. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has a long history of protecting American children and families from hazardous products, but H.R. 1615 would set a dangerous precedent by stifling the CPSC's ability to investigate potentially hazardous products. It would then limit the tools the CPSC has for dealing with any hazards it identifies. As an example of how harmful this could be, last December, the agency issued a recall of a gas stove product that was found to be a serious risk of injury or death from carbon monoxide poisoning. The CPSC was doing its job in recalling a dangerous product. This Republican legislation would prohibit the agency from using its rulemaking authority to ban such hazardous products, which could endanger the lives of any American who has that dangerous product in their home. The bill essentially prevents the CPSC from doing its job. We should be empowering the agency to protect consumers from hazardous products, not protecting potentially hazardous products. And our constituents should be able to have confidence that their household products are safe and do not cause undue harm to them or their children. To that end, we should make sure that the CPSC has all the tools it needs to identify and mitigate the risks of injury and death created by unsafe products. And this legislation, in my opinion, ties the CPSC's hands, which could harm consumers, and that's why I oppose it. Now, the second bill, H.R. 1640, is designed to prevent the Department of Energy from finalizing a recently proposed energy efficiency standard for electric and gas stoves and cooktops. The proposed DOE rule will save the American families money, reduce emissions, and reduce harmful indoor air pollutants. It's a smart and common sense policy. 50% of the products on the market already meet the proposed standard, and there are readily available design changes for those that don't. And keep in mind, we're talking 3 years from when, if you have the stove now, you could keep it. But it's 3 years after this rule is finalized before these new design and efficiency standards will go into place by the manufacturers. So I don't know why it's so controversial. Common sense energy efficiency standards save Americans money and reduce emissions. These standards are popular, and cooktops that meet the standard are already on the market. Republicans claim to care about energy prices, but this bill prohibits DOE from finalizing a rule that could save consumers up to $1.7 billion. So, again, I strongly oppose the second bill. It stands in the way of DOE doing its job, and it tries to influence and hold back future DOE rulemaking that could help lower energy costs for American families. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I oppose these bills. Look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank the gentleman for his testimony. The chair has no questions at this time, so we'll move the gentleman from Pennsylvania for any questions he might have for our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. You know, with this topic, there's a lot of confusion over who said what, so I think it's important just to go over the timeline and exact quotes. In January 2023, the Consumer Product Safety Commissioner, Trumka, stated the commission would look at regulations to ban gas stoves in American homes. That's January 2023. After major public outrage at that announcement, the media then went on this gaslighting campaign with articles from the USA Today, the New York Times, Washington Post, and the LA Times saying that there was no validity to claiming the administration wanted to ban gas stoves. Again, in January 2023, this January, Trump stated that he wanted to look at banning gas stoves. Then President Biden's press secretary said, and I quote, "The president does not support banning gas stoves." Okay. January 23rd, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, when asked about banning gas stoves, stated, and I quote, "That is so ridiculous, that story, because it sounds like the government's coming in to take your stuff. That is so not true," end quote. Then in February, just 7 days later, February 1st, the Department of Energy proposed a new rule that would effectively ban half of the gas stoves currently on the market. Last month, New York became the first state to ban gas-powered stoves, furnaces, and propane heating in new residential construction starting in 2026. And then more than 100 U.S. cities and localities have moved in the meantime to restrict gas-powered appliances, including 75 cities in California alone. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter in the record a series of articles chronicling the banning of gas stoves. First is a CNN article, "New York becomes the first state to ban natural gas stoves and furnaces in most new buildings." That's from May 3rd, 2023.
Without objection.
I'd ask unanimous consent to enter in the record another article from the Washington Times entitled, "Energy Secretary Defends Biden Administration's Gas Stove Regulation, Vows Nobody Will Take Your Gas Stoves," May 11th, 2023.
Without objection.
I'd also like to point out that in that article, it says the Energy Department is proposing new efficiency rules for gas stoves. About half current models of the market would likely be unable to comply with. I'd ask unanimous consent to enter another Washington Examiner article. This is "Gas Stove Bans. Here's Where the Initiatives Stand Across the U.S." That's from May 3rd, 2023.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter another article. This was from Forbes. It's entitled, "Biden Officials Just Can't Take Their Hands Off Your Gas Stoves." That's from February 3rd, 2023.
Without objection.
So with that being said, Representative Duncan, given all the facts mentioned, all the gaslighting we've seen from the Democratic Party and from the media on this, would you like to talk about where the regulation stands and where the push to ban gas stoves stands?
Well, the department's been clear. They have proposed a regulation, and the ranking member just said, upon enactment of this new regulation, and went through a whole litany of timelines and when those appliances would not be available. So it either is or it isn't an attempt by the administration to ultimately ban gas stoves. One thing that needs to be noted is this is not just household appliances. About 60% of restaurants across the nation prepare the meals that we enjoy in the restaurants on gas-fired stoves. They do it because it's efficient. No business is going to run a natural gas-fired stove if it's more costly than having an electric stove. They do it for the efficiency of cooking and for the cost savings that it provides our bottom line in the restaurants. Americans want to have choices in their consumer appliances, what they use in their homes. And this bill just says, don't put the government between my gas stove and me.
Thank you. I just want to point out that the de facto ban on gas cooking appliances would cause Americans to spend an extra 23 hours a year waiting for water to boil. Not to mention that natural gas is 3 times less expensive than other energy sources. But Representative Duncan, the Biden administration and my friends across the aisle have touted a half-baked study claiming that 13% of all child asthma cases are caused by gas stoves. Do you know of any reputable studies that have shown this link?
I do not.
Would you like to talk about the half-baked study they're citing?
Well, I haven't seen the studies. I don't really want to talk about something I'm not privy to. But I will say that the talk about efficiency and cost savings for Americans. Let me just point out what I said earlier, that the proposed standard would only save Americans $1.08 over the life of the appliance. Now, that $1.08 comes from averaging the $1.51 average annual savings for gas and the 0.79 annual savings for electric, weighted by the market segments identified by the DOE's own analysis, electric versus gas. So the savings aren't there. And if you look at why the Department of Energy even was empowered to propose these type regulations, it was about efficiency and it was about savings for Americans. And it clearly shows there are no efficiency deficiencies, and there's no major cost savings for Americans with this regulation.
We'll go back to cost savings in just a second, but going back to that study, it's my understanding that, and excuse me for asking about it, I didn't know that I didn't know that you hadn't read it, but there was no control. There was basically no control study on it, meaning that other studies have found that the air quality degradation is actually from the cooking oil in a pan. It doesn't matter if that's on a gas stove or an electric stove. Further, the Federal Interagency Committee on Indoor Air Quality has never identified gas cooking stove as contributing to asthma or respiratory illness. Additionally, the Consumer Product Safety Commission and Environmental Protection Agency have never identified gas stoves as a significant contributor to adverse air quality or as a health hazard. So, from my understanding, this is where the science is, despite the half-baked study my friends keep referring to. Representative Duncan, is it true that gas saves the average American family over $1,000 a year?
There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for whatever questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you so much. I love the fact that my colleagues are referring to gaslighting when we're talking about this whole insane, ridiculous gas stove conspiracy theory. It is so absurd. It really is off the charts, even for this House majority. Look, they seized upon an inartful statement by one government official and, shall we say, cooked up this crazy theory that someone's coming to get your gas stoves. We are talking about a regulation that is forward-looking, does not look at past stoves, looks at stoves to be sold in the future, where the government agency went out, it studied the stoves currently on the market, found that half of them already meet the standard, gave the rest of them 3 years to come up to snuff. That's pretty much how this stuff works. It's common sense. But instead, we have, people defending their propane. It's crazy. I have a gas stove. I intend to use it. So does everybody else. It's like when you decide that there's a new airbag model that needs to be used because the old one's killing people, okay? You revise your regulations and you move forward based upon the best available evidence. So this is just, I can't believe we're having to debate a bill entitled Gas Stoves and Freedom. This is bullshit. Sorry. Is there anything you would like to add, Mr. Plum?
Well, I just, look, if I could just add to what you said. If I know that there's some on the other side of the aisle that think that everything that we do, that agencies do, should be done by Congress and not by the agencies. I understand that, and I, of course, don't agree with that because I don't know how we could possibly spend all our time regulating every appliance and, determining what's hazardous and what's efficient. I mean, we have to rely on the agencies to do that. And essentially what these two bills say is no, we're not doing that, right? In other words, we're not going to let the agency that decides whether there's hazards or safety problems do their job, and we're going to never allow them to do it again, right? We're not going to allow the agency that tries to make things more efficient and save money and, and do things more efficiently do their job because we don't believe that they know what they're talking about. The previous conversation here was about how everything that the DOE has done to make the appliances more efficient is false, right? I mean, I guess we could sit here and debate whether, forever, whether we think the information that they've gathered in order to say this is what, how we can make these gas stoves more efficient, is false. And we could spend hours on it. But my whole point is, how do we do that in Congress? We can't spend all our time questioning these agencies. That's what these agencies are for. And understand that the way these bills are written, it's not only that they would cancel these proposed rules, and it's only a proposed rule, right? But they would never allow them to deal with it again. And so they're basically saying, what's the point of having the agency? But the biggest problem is that even Mr. Duncan, who I admire, keeps saying that the administration is banning gas stoves. That's not what they're doing. It's simply not. And maybe somebody said that. I mean, I read the headline in the New York, what is it, the Daily Post? I mean, the Daily News or the New York Post one day about the mayor banning gas stoves. He may have, I don't know. But that's not what this administration is doing. So why do you keep saying we're banning gas stoves? That's not what we're doing. We're dealing with efficiency. We're dealing with hazards. And don't tell these agencies that they can't deal with that anymore, because otherwise, I don't know how we're going to substitute ourselves for that, which is essentially what I think the Republicans are saying. I think that's the wrong thing to do. So thank you.
I know as a consumer, when I go to buy a new stove or refrigerator or the bench freezer for my cellar, I'm going to look at the energy efficiency ratings that these things have because I want to save money. I mean, that's the fiscally responsible thing to do as a consumer. So I absolutely want our federal agencies weighing in on that. But beyond that, the basic premise behind this whole effort with this rule is just wrong. If we take the Department of Energy regulation that has come under fire, or that they're trying to torch, I don't know, however we want to put it. That regulation was put together as a result of Congress authorizing the Department of Energy to regulate energy consumption of conventional cooking products, including gas stoves, under the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. And then in 1987, Congress enacted the National Appliance Energy Conservation Act, which established minimum efficiency standards. So Congress has already acted here and told the agency this is what you need to do to administer the laws that Congress is enacting. So it's entirely something Congress has acted upon. It's working within whatever the current factors are. And isn't there an issue with respect to one of the regulations that they're trying to address here, that there's a court order saying that these regulations have to occur now, that the energy or that the agency has to implement one of these regulations?
I don't know specifically about the court, but yeah, I mean, the agency has the obligation to do this. There's no question.
Okay, and that's as part of executing the will of Congress.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The distinguished vice chair of the committees.
I'll ask some questions. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you so very much. So I want to begin, once again, I think so many of us around this table love our gas stoves, right? In New Mexico, you know, we love the gas stoves because we can make our tortillas on them and our delicious red chili and all of the things that both feed our souls and our panzas. But I agree with you, Representative Scanlon, that when I go to buy a new appliance, and we're talking about new appliances, I really do appreciate the fact that they get more efficient and more efficient over time because it does save money, and that the proposed rule that we're talking about here actually says it might save from $650 million to $1.7 billion for the consumers. I know I am paying less in electricity when I replaced some of my appliances. So the concept is very good. But the other thing that when we take the time, the precious time, to consider these bills, we are also not addressing some of the really important problems that affect America. So Biden doesn't want to ban gas stoves. Congress isn't going to barge into homes and haul away your existing gas stoves. But what Congress could be doing is taking up Social Security forms consistent with the Social Security 2100 Act, which would guarantee the solvency of a program millions of Americans rely on and needs our support. 83% of Americans want us to protect and expand Social Security benefits, but we're not taking that up, even though it's very popular. Why aren't we putting on the House floor the Dream and Promise Act to create an earned path to citizenship for dreamers, which 71% of Americans support? They want us to be doing this work. So instead of doing this really important work, we are taking up sort of something that got blown out of proportion. And I really wish we were spending our time on the issues that majorities, overwhelming majorities of Americans want us to do. I look forward to, whenever I get around to buying my new gas stove, having it even be more efficient, because nobody's banning gas stoves, and my son is in culinary. He wants to continue using his gas stove, and so I'm going to make sure he gets to keep doing that. Thank you so very much. Well, let me ask Representative Pallone, is there anything, Ranking Member, is there anything else you want to add?
We just have to keep emphasizing that no one is saying that if you have a stove that you have to get rid of it or throw it away. We're talking about, as you say, regulations for efficiency under DOE, which would be 3 years from when the rule's finalized. Right now it's just proposed. And the other one, which is maybe even worse, is the fact that they would get rid of the agency that determines what's hazardous and what's a safety problem for kids and others. The way these bills are written, they wouldn't have the authority to deal with either of these issues in the future, not only with what they don't like now, but even in the future. And that would be a terrible thing. I mean, gas stoves can be dangerous, and there are hazards if they're not handled properly or manufactured properly. And I don't want to take that away from the agency. And I'm not going to substitute my analysis of what's safe or not.
Well, and I think it's really interesting that when we learn more about things, I wasn't maybe as consistent with always turning on that exhaust fan, and when it's nice, opening my doors. And once I learned about these things, it's like, oh, I myself, I'm not replacing my gas stove now, but I can take more action. So knowledge is good, and science and research are good, and we should not say we cannot progress. We should always be curious. We should always be aiming to be better at everything we do. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to point out a quote that I have found on Commissioner Trumka, who is the Commissioner of the U.S. Consumer Product and Safety Commission. I'm going from a CBS News article from January, and he was nominated by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate. He's been serving since 2021. And from this CBS News article in January, it says, Trumka told Bloomberg News in an interview that, quote, a ban was on the table for gas stoves. Saying further that he said, quote, we need to be talking about regulating gas stoves, whether it's drastically reducing emissions or banning gas stoves entirely. Banning is a powerful tool in our toolbox, and it is a real possibility here. So whatever the opposition wants to say, and they want to say this is ridiculous and it's blown out of proportion and all kinds of things and flip to other issues, this is serious. This is the commissioner that is leading this department, and he is talking about banning gas stoves. So for as much as the opposition wants to say it's ridiculous, it's a real issue, and people are concerned about it, and we are hearing from constituents about it. And I support the bills in front of us to try to help this. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I'll wait for Mr. Pallone. He seems distracted. I'm trying to figure out what the rule does that the Department of Energy is asking for or trying to promulgate. Mr. Pallone, do you own a gas stove? Does it meet the new standards or not? You said half of the ones that exist do. And
I do not know.
You do not know?
No, I know. Look, I love you, but one of the points I'm trying to make here is that, I can't spend, maybe you can, and God bless you, but I can't spend all my time figuring out whether my stove meets the standards or not. I mean, I just have a lot to do. I can't answer your question. I haven't checked the stove before I came here. I just haven't.
I appreciate your honesty.
Okay.
That's the question. I'm trying to figure out, does my stove?
My understanding is this, and you cut me off if you want. My understanding is that these are proposed rules from the DOE that would take effect 3 years from when they're finalized, which they have not been, right? It doesn't affect any stove that you have now at all, right? You don't have to change it. You don't have to throw it out. You can continue to use it. And I'm not disagreeing with what Mrs. Fishbach and Mr. Rochensteller said, that statements have been made, but that's not what's in the rule. Those are statements that were made, and people make statements, maybe they shouldn't have, but there's nothing in the rule says 3 years from the finalization, and they put together certain efficiency standards for new stoves,
So-
newly manufactured stoves.
I mean, when you burn a fuel in the presence of oxygen, it gives off a set amount of energy. I am trying to figure out how they make it more energy efficient.
I don't know. I couldn't answer that.
What I'm concerned about as I read through the rules, they're just making the burner smaller, the biggest burner on the stove. I
Again,
mean, if you put in a certain amount of gas, you're going to get a certain amount of heat out. There's not a whole lot you can do to change that. So I'm wondering what's the difference? These are genuine, honest questions. I'm also wondering if you know, a lot of our electricity comes from natural gas plants. And the engineering tells you this, but just common sense would tell you this. You can burn the natural gas at a plant in a turbine. You can spin some generators and generate electricity, ship it a couple hundred miles to somebody's house, and then you turn on an electric element and try to generate heat from something that started as heat, went into electricity, and came back to heat. That's going to be a lot less efficient than burning the natural gas at the house directly. I can just tell you, I don't know what the efficiency is, but it's not even going to approach 50% efficiency. When you try to turn something like natural gas into electricity and then ship it across, you know, even if it's 20 miles, even if you're next door to the power plant, shifting forms of electricity to get back, shifting forms of energy, you're going to lose something at every stage. So if this rule causes more people to buy electric stoves instead of gas stoves, they're going to have to burn more gas to cook the same food. I mean, that's why I think one of my colleagues here mentioned earlier that people who use natural gas, maybe you know this, Mr. Duncan, they save money, don't they, over electric appliances and natural gas appliances?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mentioned earlier that the cost savings is minuscule. And
For the rule,
yeah.
the rule cost savings.
So to comply, the manufacturers, to your point earlier, are basically removing some burners, so you have fewer burners on the gas appliance, and they would lower the heat. They would put a thermocoupler in there or something to lower the heat on that burner, which means it's going to take longer to cook. That means about the same amount of gas is probably burned to produce the same product, and that is the cooked food on the new gas stoves. And, you know, I'm interested to hear, very interested to hear that so many people have gas stoves in their home. But one of the things that the DOE points to is the air emissions and the air quality. But these are older stoves that they continue to have. They're not concerned about their own air quality, or they'd be doing something else. They'd be taking them out and putting electric stoves in today. In fact, they like the efficiency and the cost savings they get from a natural gas-fired stove because it's efficient, it cooks their food in a timely manner, and it saves them money. So I just wanted to point that out.
I mean, it's almost comical to me. I'm sitting here reading the rule, and I'm several dozens of pages into it. And maybe it has something to do with the pilot light as well, although there seems to be some existing rule on pilot lights already. But you can't get any more heat out of, you know, a certain amount of natural gas when you burn it. There are engines and motors, or engines, turbines that are more efficient than other engines and turbines. But when you just burn the flame, I'm wondering if we're talking about efficiency here, or we're just talking about the size of the burner. Because if you're talking about the size of the burner, it's not about efficiency. Did you want to comment on that?
well, I just want to point out that there's nothing in this proposed rule that's trying to get you to go to an electric stove. I mean, you still would have a gas stove, just making it more efficient. So I don't want to, again, I don't want to give the impression that the department's rulemaking is trying to tell people that you should use an electric stove. I mean, Ms. Leisure Fernandez pointed out that people are going to continue to use gas for all kinds of reasons. They like the food, they like the product. We're not suggesting you move to electric.
Well, I guess I need to know how this rule makes things more efficient.
I couldn't answer that. See,
That
again,
troubles
what
me.
you're doing, and I know I know, and I'm not criticizing you for it, You want to substitute, you want to look at all the details about what the department's doing and how they got to this stage and substitute your own analysis. That's fair. But I think that what this bill does is basically say that this department's not going to be able to do this now or in the future. And I think that's a mistake, because if they don't have the expertise and they don't have the opportunity to do this, we're not going to be able to substitute our opinion for it each time.
Well,
Maybe.
Sorry to interrupt. I think I gave quite a bit of time. I don't want to substitute my opinion. I want to know the facts. I don't like, and so I've asked factual questions. How does the rule make the appliance more efficient? Because then maybe we can figure out how it's going to make it more expensive. I mean, why are half of the appliances not in compliance, or 96%, or whoever's number you want to take? Were they just bad engineers, or were they actually making a product that people want and that has a bigger burner? I don't know. We don't even know the answers to these things. If Congress doesn't know what the Department of Energy is doing or seeks to do with these rules, then we shouldn't let them do it. And, yeah, Mr. Duncan.
Well, I just want to point out that Congress passed the Energy Policy and Conservation Act to provide the Department of Energy with the authority to issue energy efficiency standards that, one, save a significant amount of energy, and two, are cost-effective for consumers. There's no study that shows this saves a significant amount of energy, and as I point out, there's no effective cost savings there for the consumer. If you think about this push for electrification by the left, they really don't want that natural gas-fired power plant to produce that electricity. They want it produced by wind and solar, in some utopian mindset that there's going to be enough wind and solar to supplicate or replace the natural gas-fired power plants that are out there. And it's not. The economics just don't add up with land mass and available sunlight during the day, available wind energy. So this is a proposed rule that surely indicates and truly indicates that the Biden administration just has a war on natural gas because it is a fossil fuel. I think that's clear and simple.
The longer you take to boil a pot of water, the longer that pot's hot and the more energy it loses to the environment. Like, doing something and taking longer to do it when you're using heat generally results in less efficiency. So I mean, I'm going to try to struggle through this to understand the science of it and the thermodynamics before we go to the floor tomorrow. But back to the committee work that you did, you said that it was bipartisan. Which bill is that you were
Both of them. Both the bills before us are bipartisan. And in fact, the gas stove ban was included in H.R. 1, and 29 Democrats voted in favor of it on the floor.
So you're saying you had co-sponsors from
Had
those
votes in committee.
and votes in committee. Democrats in your committee voted for this.
That's correct. It passed bipartisan.
Well, I think we should have a bipartisan vote for this rule tonight. I would hope we'd see that same spirit of bipartisanship, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlemen,
For the Rules Committee rule, not the not the DOE rule.
gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
Ms. Plone, have you ever seen an installation of a gas water heater or gas stove in a commercial building?
Commercial building? No, in my home, but not in the commercial building.
The reason this is so serious, you are banning gas stoves. And here's how you're doing it. You're doing it through regulations. Whoever came up with this in the Biden administration needs to get in the field and look at it. What would you do when you get a call in the middle of the day for a tenant who a transformer goes down, no electricity, and the lady, the hair salon, and we've had this experience, they don't have hot water. And what's more, if it stays out to replace a transformer, it takes time. And what would you do when they demand their money back on the lease? What would you do about it?
I'm not sure What is your question again?
My question to you, if you've never seen the installation of any gas furnace now,
Only in a home, not in a
okay, commercial buildings, it happens everywhere. What this regulation does is makes it impossible to comply. Because I guarantee you what they're going to have is the exhaust system that they're going to put on the manufacturers. And you can't do it, particularly in a high-rise building that you've got multiple floors.
I don't understand why you think that making these more efficient would necessarily do that.
It's not efficient at all. The cost to do this, to refit an older building that's had gas, a restaurant on the third floor of a building.
But again-
What I'm asking you to you might want to, you're talking as an expert on this.
No, I'm not an expert. Let me say this. My understanding is that this is with regard to new gas stoves that would be installed 3 years after the finalization of the rule. So I don't know why you would say that anything has to be retrofitted. You mean when you put in the new one, you'd have to retrofit what?
You'd have to retrofit the building.
And why would that necessarily be the
To
case?
comply, you've got to retrofit it. And you don't have access, this is in real life. You don't have access to the building to do that. So it forces you to go with electricity, which is unreliable in a lot of cases.
I mean, it doesn't seem to me that that would be the case, but again, I'm not an expert.
Well, I promise you, if you look at it, go ask somebody that has got a 10-year-old building that's had gas stoves in the building, and when they come, because we've seen it happen in other things.
Well, the only thing I can assure you that it's not the intention to say that you can't use a gas stove in any situation and you have to move to electric. That's
What I'm
not
saying
the
is,
case.
Mr. Sloan, it is the intention, or either it's ignorance, either they don't understand what they're doing. This is very serious for your commercial buildings to have to go in and retrofit to put a electric unit in because you can't comply with the gas because the walls won't allow it. Can you imagine the cost of going
But
back?
it's not the intention to move to electric.
May not be that's what's so frustrating about this administration, Ms. Plum. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the mechanics of what they're asking the American people to do. It's not the role of government to do that. And if you ever just in your district, I'm sure, go ask some tenants in commercial buildings, not so much residential. That's more, well, it is a big deal with condominiums, which are high-rises, that they have gas stoves. To comply, I saw somewhere it's $1,000. It's unbearable. It's the cost to retrofit it they're going to throw their hands up. You can't do it. Well, you can do it at a price. That's like saying, price me a car that's the driver is safe under any condition. Can you imagine the cost of that? You can design a car that the driver is going to be safe. You can put enough steel in it. But what I'm saying, this thing has sent shockwaves through the commercial industry anyway, because we have had, when the power goes down, gas-fired units, both from a cooking side and from just the use, I mentioned the hair salon, that's actually happened. When the electricity's down, and they wish they had gas. But the ones that have it, to come back and retrofit in buildings that are already existing. In a perfect world, you could design a building that I guess would try to comply with, I hadn't seen the details of what they're going to want to require, but just the thought of this is unbelievable that they're doing this. But that's why the bells went off. I know you talk to any commercial building, he'll tell you this is tragic and it's unsustainable, and the cost of it would be something that they would probably throw their hands up and say, I don't know what they would do. But look into the details of it, and I think you would see in your district the cost to comply would be something they just couldn't do. And I guarantee you, whatever cost savings it is, it's not going to be there. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, is recognized for any questions he may have.
I thank the chairman. Just a quick question for the gentleman from South Carolina. The two bills that we've got before us, one from Mr. Armstrong, one from Ms. Lesko, and all the various co-sponsors, to the best of my understanding, they are largely prophylactic, sort of preventing an overreach, and then with certain kind of criteria, correct? In other words, prohibiting DOE from implementing conservation standards for kitchen ranges or ovens if the standards result in the unavailability of a product based on the type of fuel the product consumes, right? In other words, saying, hey, you're rattling a lot down there, and you can say, oh, whatever, it was just a misspeak. Well, it's a misspeak by a federal official with an entire agency under that federal official saying, yeah, maybe we'll ban gas stoves. So is it not true that the legislation in question has caveats about the reach of the purpose of the legislation, right? It's saying, hey, we want to do X in order to prevent Y. Is that not correct?
Absolutely correct.
And that's not true with both pieces of legislation, correct?
That's correct.
In other words, they would still allow, what, for better or worse, by the way, different question. They would still allow regulators to regulate. They just wouldn't allow them to regulate such that the extreme happens, that consumers are unable to get the products that they want.
That's correct.
And so I think that's kind of the question that I think is most important. And when the exchange a minute ago with my friend from Kentucky about wanting to substitute our expertise, and we've had this exchange before here, and we just had it with respect to the RAINS Act, is my friend from South Carolina agree that the point here is about Congress saying, wait a second, no, this is like our fundamental job under Article 1 to go say, hey, bureaucrat, you are down there saying X. You're an expert. You're just God's gift to all things gas and energy and whatever else. You're the genius, right? You're the one who knows everything. We bumpkins sitting out in our little farms in Texas or wherever, we're a bunch of idiots. We're all going to die from stuff if you're not there protecting me. All those things. You're the genius. Are we not just saying, hold on a second, is there some check on the genius? Is there some check on whoever it is down there in the Department of Energy or whatever saying, hey, Chip, you just can't have that gas-burning stove in your house that's been there since you've been alive, or, the gas-fired stove that your grandfather cooked fried fish on, for 80 years. You can't, we don't want to have the ability in Congress to be able to check said bureaucrat if the bureaucrat wants to say, sorry, you may not be able to do that anymore?
You're exactly right. I mean, we are a representative republic. We all each represent 700+ thousand people. And there's been a lot of pushback across this country about this proposed regulation. Proposed regulations ultimately become regulations without congressional pushback like we're seeing today. And so I believe that Congress is representing our constituents who raise the alarm over what appliances they may choose for their home. When there's no clear evidence that the appliances that administration is, they're not just nudging us that way, they're shoving us in a certain direction, will be more efficient or more cost effective for the consumer. As the gentleman from Kentucky said, you're still going to burn just as much gas to heat a pot of water on a smaller burner as you did on a larger burner. You'll do it more time, and it's going to be less efficient. The cost savings are clear that they're not there. So I think you're right. We're pushing back against the administration because we don't have an oligarchy in this country. We don't have a small group of experts that tell a democratic republic like the United States of America, this is what you have to do. We have an elected Congress. Now, we did give the administration, through numerous pieces of legislation passed before we got here, authority to do certain things. But that doesn't limit our ability to represent our constituents when they see this kind of overreach.
I would assume that my friend from South Carolina agrees. I know my friend from Kentucky and South Carolina up here agree, and maybe some others, that this might be why it's wise to vote no on the vast majority of these pieces of legislation that empower said bureaucrats and those down in the administration to do, well, frankly, just about anything at all, but in particular to be able to go down the road of possibly banning a consumer product that has been being used by millions of Americans every day for years. Quick question. Part of the arguments, right, have to do with, internal health and asthma and so forth, because somebody did a study. But to the best of my understanding, that there's no direct correlation or understanding of some sort of causation there. I mean, people have asthma for all literally hundreds, thousands of different reasons. Is that not part of this issue that's being used? And then my question for you is actually more important, is do you think that's actually a ruse for what's really going on here, which is just a quest for the 100% electrification of America, all in pursuit of a agenda?
You're exactly right. I mean, as I pointed out earlier, those that, and I can name some Democrats on our committee that actually said they had gas stoves in their house, they like their stove, but they don't want the average American to have the same stove they have. They like their stove if they're not concerned about the air quality because they're still using older appliances. And look, I think personally that we ought to be exporting more natural gas to help the quality of lives and improve air quality for folks that are using other things to heat their homes or cook their food on and have to cook it that day because they can't have appliances like refrigerators and sometimes propane-powered refrigerators in rural areas that can actually keep food fresh. So this war on fossil fuels is trickling all the way down, my gentleman from Texas, trickling all the way down to the American consumer who's having their choices limited by a government that does not want to use fossil fuels in any shape, form, or fashion at some point in the future.
So last question, I know we're trying to be mindful of time for votes. Is the gentleman aware, or does he agree in general with the following rough proposition, that while we, this country, continue to pursue and chase the fossil fuelification of this country through massive regulations that are making it impossible, if not, really costly, if not impossible, to build fossil fuel generated power. That was in fact the purpose of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. That was in fact the goal by the massive subsidization of the, I'll call it unreliable energy that is resulting in grids that are not able to be relied upon by the American people to be sustained. And that while we're doing all of that, at the end of the day right now in China, for example, they are building 2 new coal-fired plants a week on top of the roughly 1,100 coal-fired plants they have in operation. And then we have about 250 coal-fired plants, gas-fired plants. But in Texas, for example, we're not building gas and coal-fired plants anymore because of the subsidies being put forward by the federal government. Would the gentleman agree that it is purposeful that the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies is designed with the specific intent of destroying fossil fuel-based energy, and that as a result, the United States will be weaker in terms of national security, weaker in terms of grid reliability, weaker in terms of our ability economically to be in a position to export clean-burning American natural gas, and that that taken in totality, everything I just said, if the gentleman agrees, that all of this stuff we're talking about here with gas stoves, this is just the ramifications all the way down to a person's kitchen of that same policy that the vast majority of the American people right now going about their daily life have no idea what their government is doing to them and their ability to afford energy and their ability to have human flourishing and exist on this planet that God gave us in a way that will amount to the best life for them and their children. Would the gentleman agree?
If there's a number larger than 100%, I would agree with that number. So I'd say 100% agree with you.
Thank the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Last winter, Winter Storm Elliott hammered my district over Christmas, and my constituents dealt with life-threatening blackouts as the grid struggled to operate through such a massive blizzard, the worst blizzard in my entire lifetime. But one thing that my constituents could count on, despite the blackouts, was the use of their gas stoves. And in some instances, that was the only source of heat in the home during a 3-day blizzard event. These were lifelines for people trapped in their homes during a storm that killed over 40 people in western New York. But the critical nature of these appliances couldn't stand in the way of my state's determination to make the pipe dreams of a Green New Deal a crushing reality for hardworking New Yorkers. Our governor, not to be outdone by the Biden administration, she has marched ahead with a statewide phase-out, also known as a ban, of natural gas hookups in new residential and commercial buildings. Ignoring the historic efficiency and savings of natural gas that has brought New York and this entire country, for that matter, over the last 30 years, Democrats in my state are determined to force New Yorkers off of reliable, safe natural gas that's very plentiful in my district into an energy future that our own state's independent energy auditors have said will be one with less affordable power and a less secure grid. Congressman Duncan, if DOE's proposed rule is finalized, what will happen to the gas stoves that no longer meet the efficiency standards?
Well, the manufacturers are going to have to go back at a very costly process and try to meet the new standards proposed by the DOE. That tells me there's going to be fewer choices for our consumers. And to your point about the winter in New York, natural gas saved a lot of people. There's a war in New York and other states on natural gas. We've seen it in California, we've seen it in New York. And having the ability to cook when the power goes out, having the ability to cut the gas-fired logs on to heat the home when the power goes off, having hot water out of that Renai or whatever brand hot water heater you have that's gas-fired, having the ability to dry your wet clothes because you've been out there shoveling snow trying to get your car out so you can go to church or to work or whatever with a gas-fired dryer. These are important things. And I'll tell you, the consumers wouldn't have them in their home if they weren't more efficient and save them money. That's why I have a hot water heater. That's why I have a gas dryer. So we see this continued war on fossil fuels taking so many forms, and here we are at the very fundamental form in the kitchens of our homes, where meals are prepared for families to sit around the table and eat together and discuss their day and do schoolwork. That's what this administration's going after. They're getting between the gas stove and the American consumer.
Absolutely. This did not, and thank you very much for that, this did not just magically appear one night. I mean, there is a comprehensive effort in this country to have a war on natural gas appliances and the use of natural gas. Among the number of consequences this rule would have on everyday Americans, it would prohibit the sale of many products already on the market. In other words, for those that struggle with the synonyms, it's a simple ban. This is a pattern within this administration's Department of Energy. Raise efficiency standards, limiting ability of everything from cooking appliances to the technology needed to ensure that we can keep the lights on. And for those of you that insist that these aren't bans, all I have to say is I have a bridge to sell you. Suddenly, technology and equipment that was bought and sold one day is now forced out of circulation the next. And in the process, American families, American farms, and American businesses pay the price for tighter supply chains and even higher costs. Heating bills in New York State rose by 30% this past winter, and they'll continue to climb if we allow the Biden administration to further regulate Americans out of affordable energy in their future. And I strongly support these measures here today, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today, and the witnesses are excused.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Representative Moskowitz to the table. Guess we got you trapped back there.